Apple have been fighting lawsuits in court the past God knows how long. These lawsuits touch on many aspects about Apple's anti-consumer practices, from consumer protection to unifying the USBs, to many more things, and that is not our point today. Our point is, because of these lawsuits, good things came to the Apple official ecosystem. Last month, in the beginning of April, Apple announced a major change to their App Store. Apple finally allowed gaming emulators into the App Store. For the most part, these emulators were only accessible using either jailbreaks or side loading. However, now developers get to release their emulators officially on the App Store instead. Today, I want to see how the emulation scene in the App Store have grown and how it got where it is in a month and a half. And for that, we will have to go through a rundown of events first, starting with the change made in the app review guidelines. The guidelines have included game emulators, and that was all that is needed to let app developers know that these apps are in fact allowed now. However, after this change, immediately everyone pointed out, what about the games? In case you don't know, a game emulator is only the software needed to emulate the games. But that software does not come with games. The user will have to get these games on their own, but Apple's guidelines say that app developers must include universal links to data related to emulators, which potentially could mean the games themselves, and that would have been a major issue. If game developers have to provide links to the games to use with the emulators, it means that they will have to break the copyright for these games, which will make their apps illegal and they will not become available in the App Store in the first place. Nothing was immediately clarified about this, and this thing was left hanging for a couple of days. Around a week later, the first emulator came out, which is iGBA, and was taken down shortly after. Initially, everyone thought that Apple was only allowing emulators as a way to calm down the lawsuits, and they were never really going to allow them. However, quickly after the takedown, Apple confirmed a number of things. One, they took down iGBA because it was an app stolen from the original creator. The app is an open source project. Two, Apple will not require emulators to provide the games, and they are up to the user to figure out. And I want to touch on this point a bit more later during this video. About 2 days after the removal of iGBA, Delta emulator came out, and well, it is still out and it is also killing it. Starting off, Delta is an emulator that can run games from the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo, the Nintendo 64, the Nintendo DS, the Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance, as well as the Sega Genesis. So basically a great app and very versatile. The Delta emulator have proven that ROMs can be provided by the user instead of in-app purchases. It also proven that emulators are in demand, and I think it was the number 1 or 2 on the App Store when it came out. Now let's talk about ROMs. ROMs are files created after the game is moved from its physical device, a cartridge or a CD, into a digital format. In short, it is the game just in a different medium. Now the way Apple handled how they deal with this is very hands-off approach, and that's a very normal thing. Let me explain. First off, if you want to sell a game digitally, you need the copyright for it, and that is why it is extremely messy. Each game will have its own process to get any form of copyright for, and worse yet, some of these games are either abandoned software or there is no way to reach out to get permission from. If Apple decided to put their hands on this whole thing, I guarantee you Apple will have multiple more lawsuits to deal with. It is practically impossible to have any kind of control over this whole thing, which is why it is up to the user to get their own games, and that can be done via buying a physical copy of the game and find a way to turn them into ROMs and use them to emulate these games. The problem with that is it can be very challenging and technical for the average user. The other method, sadly, is by downloading pirated ROMs, which is the reason why emulators do get in trouble to begin with, and will lead to practically any emulator to just not be allowed in the App Store. However, Apple decided it is not their problem to deal with. Now that an emulator is live in the App Store and the game plan was set, What other emulators did Apple users get since then? First up, the very well-known PSP emulator BBSSPB for the PlayStation handheld console, and this one have a lot of my favorite games. Things like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Tag Force series, Patapon series, the Loco Roco series, and a couple of Monster Hunter games, and many great JRPGs as well. This emulator has had great amount of support for a very long time. Gamma is also a PlayStation emulator, however, this time it is a PlayStation 1 emulator. The PlayStation 1 is very well known console. The amount of great games in it is practically wild. From Final Fantasy to Tekken, Metal Gear, classic Spyro and Crash Bandicoot. Yeah, there is a very huge and really good selection. After that we have the IMSX2. I really don't know much about this emulator. I know it basically emulates. From what I saw, it looks like it emulates computer games similar to the SCUMV virtual machine, an app to help run a specific type of PC games that run on a specific engine. And finally, RetroArch, the big one. RetroArch is a very well-known emulator that run many consoles, from Nintendo to PlayStation to Atari and Sega, and much more. This emulator basically covers the majority of all the other emulators that came out so far, and actually let me read you everything. I got this from a wiki. So RetroArch includes the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo, the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Advance, the Nintendo 64, Sega Genesis and Mega Drive, Sega Master System, Sega Game Gear, the PlayStation 1, the PSP, the Atari 2600, the Atari 7800, the Atari Lynx, Neo Geo Pocket Color, PC Engine, TurboGrafx 16, WonderSwan and WonderSwan Color, multiple arcade machine emulator, DOS, Commodore 64, and the SCUM virtual machine. And that's why I said it's the big one. There are a lot more emulators that are coming to the App Store. After all, these were available for a very long time, just not officially, and will require users to break some rules to get. But now that they are available officially by Apple, it just needs some more time to be approved, and others might need minor adjustment, and they will come to the App Store. Now, seeing that Apple users are clearly eating good and will probably keep on being fed, will there be any problems that could affect the emulation on the App Store? Well, first off, the guidelines are specifically for retro game console. The problem here is that retro is not exactly clarified. Retro, the word, does not have a clear timeline on what consoles it will cover, and funny enough, if Apple need an excuse to remove something, they will just use that as an excuse. It also means some of the much more modern console emulators will not arrive to the official store because of that. But in all fairness, that is kind of minor. The bigger issue is Nintendo will probably not be happy with this development. In case you don't know, Nintendo is on a constant battle against emulation. In fact, they have sued and shut down multiple emulators not too long ago. And honestly, everyone knows they will pull something off at some point. Finally, I want to say, what a time to be alive. These are really great and unexpected news. It is always amazing when consumers get the most out of their devices. In this case, Apple users. If anything, I wish I had an iPhone just to test these apps and see how well they fare with Apple hardware. Congratulations to the normie Apple users. You now have access to emulators with absolute ease, no jailbreak or anything needed, and these emulators have some of the best games in history. That is for our topic. Please like and sub.